Can we have a round of applause to get one more time? Anyway, thank you all for coming, even though they're in the back row, they can't hear. I told them the babes should sit in the back, so they don't want to get called on that. Remember in school when you sat in the back? You know what I used to do? I'd stand in the back and say, turn your chairs around. The castle is a residence. It's called the Fortune Academy, but it looks like a castle, so the men and women that live there called it the castle. And my background is in the theater when the Fortune Society started as a result of a play. And I would get theater tickets, and a lot of the guys would go to plays, guys and women. The guy would go to the theater for the first time. One of the guys said, gee, it's great going to the plays. And I said, you know, our community meetings sometimes are more dramatic than the plays that we're seeing. And he said, why don't we do a play about it? And that's the impetus of this. And the four people you're about to meet, well, they'll tell you their story. So let me introduce the cast. Before, David, could you just chat a little bit about one of the things that David did, and David is a role model for New Jersey Reentry because David had the courage to understand the importance of providing resources and tools for people that were in prison. And obviously, if you're coming home from prison, you have real challenges. Could you talk a little bit about the history of establishment of Fortune?
Well, we started as a volunteer group. One of the things that you go to Fortune now, there's all these programs going, but they were all started by the needs of the people coming to us. I mean, when our first few years, it was a volunteer group. Am I allowed to swear, Jim?
Yes. It's not Sunday or Saturday.
Four of our guys went on a television program in 1968, and people coming out of prison were an invisible population then, because if you were making it, you had to lie about your past. You couldn't get a job, you couldn't get housing, all the things that we've been fighting for all these years didn't exist. And it was an invisible population. The only time a guy or a woman who had done time would go be seen on television if they had a paper bag over their head or it was the perp law. And we got four guys to go on a television program in our early days. And the next day, my little theater office, which was still the headquarters for Fortune, there were about 100 guys waiting on the stairwell. And we were just advocating for to erase the invisibility. We had no programs. We were ragamuffins. We didn't know what we were doing. We just knew that what was happening was wrong. And all these guys are standing there. They had seen the television show and they thought they were seeing a big, prosperous organization. And it was just me sitting in one room with my theater posters. And this guy, here's the swear word. This guy comes up to me and says, "You don't know what the fuck you're doing, do you?" And I said, "I don't have a clue." He said, "Move over. I'm a drunk, and we talk to each other. If we keep each other sober, we stay out of trouble. Maybe if we talk to each other, we can keep each other out of jail." And Kenny Jackson became the first counselor right there, March of '68, sitting in a desk in my little room. And later in the day, a guy named Mel Rivers came in, and they decided this is what they wanted to do with their life. And Mel was working as a gypsy taxi driver illegally, and Kenny had a fake license and was a truck driver. And they kept doing that, but because we were going on radio programs and some television, we started getting speaking engagements. And our first counseling was, Kenny had a big station wagon, 5 guys would sit in the back, and we'd talk about, how do we stop all this crap of in and out and coming out and nothing for you. And so they kept saying the first thing we have to do is keep talking to each other to stay out. But the guys coming in needed jobs, so we needed a job unit. So we started finding jobs. We needed housing, so we built the castle. It took a long time. People have a lot of mental issues. We have a place called the Better Living Center for therapy. We have an arts program. Everything that's there was decided by the people's needs that were coming to us. And the castle was an important part. Housing. Because half the people coming out of prison now in New York are homeless, living in shelters, which is a one-way trip back in. And So we found this spot. We now have 6 residents, and tonight 1,000 people will be sleeping in fortune beds that otherwise would be homeless or in a shelter. So we're proud of the castle, which is the signature, our landmark residence. And people come from all over the world, and they say, "Can you come and partner with us?" We say, "No, we're here in New York, but come and hang out, steal what we're doing, and make it work for you, whatever your community is." And so it's happening. And now I'm exhausted. I'm 103 now. And it's very healing. Theater is healing. I told some of you, one of the things that happened after the play once, somebody said, "You guys have a tough life. How does it feel to get applause?" That's very interesting. When you've spent all your life being told you're nothing, or you're negative, and that's how you define yourself, because when you're 4 and 5 and you can't process things, and older people are defining you with negative things, that's what you become. Read the Darryl Strawberry story, it's interesting. But theater is healing for the audience as well as the people. So I'm not going to talk anymore because it's their stories, the cast of the castle. You and me have to get off the stage.
Can you introduce the cast?
No, they're going to introduce themselves. Okay. Let me introduce the cast of the castle.
Hello!
That's not in the play.
Morning.
My name is Casimiro Torres, and I lived at the castle. I was homeless when I arrived in 2005, with 67 arrests and 16 years in prison.
My name is Philip Hall. I came to the castle in August of 2016 on the very day that I was released from the New York State Prison after serving 30 years of 20 years life sentence. I was 50 years old.
My name is Vilma Ortiz Donovan. I'm a 61-year-old Hispanic woman who came to the castle in July of 2007 after concluding my second state prison bid.
My name is Irvin Hunt. I've been called Easy since I was a kid. I'm a former castle resident. I'm a recovering everything with more than 50 arrests. At 69, I'm just starting my life.
Fortune Society opened the castle in the spring of 2002.
There are 60 beds for men and women.
To live at the castle, you have to be formerly incarcerated or homeless for one reason or another.
The castle was built in 1913 and was a Catholic girls' school until the mid-70s.
After the schoolgirls left, there was a yeshiva for a few years, and then they also left. The empty building became an eyesore, and eventually a crack house.
Groups and private developers had their eyes on this unusual looking building, which can be seen while driving up the West Side Highway.
The irony is, some neighbors protested when the Fortune Society bought the building in 1998. Joanne Page led teams to building meetings and police council sessions in Harlem, promising that the Fortune Society would be good neighbors.
Joanne's wisdom and tenacity, and a citizens advisory group of concerned neighbors was formed before the ribbon cutting in 2002.
Still, there were pickets and protests at the opening.
But things change. Every Halloween, the residents, they make the castle into a haunted house and invite the children in from the neighborhood to put some scares in people.
Nearly 1,000 kids showed up at the castle this past Halloween.
And as Joanne Page said, they were frightened of us at the beginning, and now they trust us with their kids.
Fortune established one non-negotiable rule.
And that was that violence or the threat of violence would not be tolerated. If we were going to change our lives, we would have to feel safe. Each resident will have a case manager. Fortune staff will be available for job counseling, healthcare guidance, educational opportunities, and individual counseling. All of Fortune's resources were made available to us. The no violence rule was new to many who walked through our doors.
In my background, my home, youth houses, reformatories, jails, prisons, shelters, reentry, violence was a factor. It was part of my upbringing. I never questioned it or thought it could be any different. Violence was a part of the rite of passage going from boyhood into manhood.
And we are typical of the people who arrive at the castle. We enter with a lot of baggage, and none of it is made by Samsonite. We will tell you who we were when we arrived and who we have become. But we are all a work in progress. These stories, our lives, not finished. This is just another chapter in a non-ending book.
When I look back, I feel like crying. I never had a chance. It's not a complaint. It's just a fact. By the time I was old enough to choose, I no longer had a choice. I was getting high at the age of 10, just to numb the pain.
I was the youngest of my parents' 5 children. I was born in August of 1966 in Greenpoint Hospital in Brooklyn. My mother, Ann Marie Hall, she was a home attendant. My father, Emmett Hall, he was a construction worker. Now, there was nothing, I mean, absolutely nothing in my life that would suggest the path that I took, ending up in the New York State prison system. I was shy and painfully awkward as a young person. I never felt comfortable in my own skin. But drugs and alcohol, they made me feel very comfortable. What a predicament.
I was one of 7 kids, suburban girl, Long Island, with Hispanic parents. Ortiz is my maiden name. I grew up in the suburbs. My parents were, and they are, protective and loving. I'm the one who shouldn't have ended up in prison, but we make choices.
I was born in Manhattan in 1954, the son of a man who was in prison. And later I became the father of a lad who ended up incarcerated. 3 generations of men behind bars. The untold American story. My mom tried with me and my sister, but my father was an addict and an alcoholic. He went to prison when I was 14. That may have been the start of my downfall.
I said that if I look back that I was afraid I would cry, but I don't. It's not because I'm afraid to cry. I'm just afraid that if I ever started, that I may never stop.
At the age of 13, I began smoking weed and drinking beer. Like I said, there was no drama in my life, but some of the young people my age went to getting high, and I wanted to fit in. I became a truant because of my habits, eventually dropped out of school, had a few minor hassles with the law, petty things like jumping the turnstile or smoking on the train. I wasn't doing much of anything with my life. I was just aimlessly afloat upon a fast-flowing bubble of tragedy.
With me, I feel like I never felt important. The surroundings were fine, but I didn't seem to matter. Lots of teenagers rebel, but I was out of control. I hated school and started drinking with the guys, and by the time I was 17, I left home. I went to go live with a girlfriend, and she was a disco doll, and that's when my downward spiral began.
I went to PS 43 in the Bronx and was a good enough student to be chosen to attend an elite junior high school and take special classes. I told everyone that my dad was dead because I was ashamed that he was in prison. I started using while I was in the 8th grade and was selling drugs by 15. I became a father at 15. Jeff's mother was 13.
I never knew there was an upside to rebel against. My mother had 9 kids from 3 different fathers. Mine, I never knew him. I knew he was from Puerto Rico and he was in the Navy, but that's it. My mother tried, but she was an alcoholic. My house was where all the junkies, thieves, and gangsters hung out. when I was 5 and my brother Nino was 6, the guys that hung out my house, they would make a ring. They'd put us into it and make us fight. We'd have to fight until one of us was hurt or just bloody enough. And the men would bet on us, like a dog fight. Afterwards, we'd take care of whatever cuts and bruises we had and sleep on a mattress in the back room. Everyone was so outraged by Michael Vick and the dog fighting. I wonder where they were when I was a kid.
By the time I was 20, I had allowed the drugs to take control of my life. I was living at home with my family, but my girlfriend Maureen, she was pregnant, and I mean, I worked off and on at that time, but I knew I wasn't living right. I stole from my family to get high. I was a mental and emotional wreck filled with self-hatred, anger, guilt, shame. Maureen, now pregnant with our second child, and my family, they got together and tried to convince me to go into an inpatient substance abuse program. But Mr. Know-It-All, I decided to join the military.
In those teen years, God, those were tough years. I did a lot of things that I am not proud of. I guess I was looking for love because I didn't love myself. I'd hang out all night and sleep all day. When you're that young, you think you know it all, but you don't know where you're heading. You make choices, and good or bad, it's what shapes your life for years to come.
My first arrest came when I was 18. I stole some hats so I could pay for the drugs I was using. The irony was my mother was a milliner. My mother made hats. I was given 6 months probation, but nothing changed. Probation provided no guidance.
All that drinking and drugs around my house, that was the norm. People overdosed, had knife fights. Ambulance and cop cars were constantly at my house. My mother hardly noticed. When I was 6, the 6 youngest of us were taken away from her. We were taken to an institution upstate New York where we were immediately separated. My brother Nino and I were sent to a cottage called 11 Hayden. Now, at home with my mother, we were raised with no structure and no discipline. 11 Hayden was run on strict discipline and obedience. When we arrived, I was greeted with a smack that sent me across the room. I was 6 years old and I had already experienced fear, but I was about to learn about fear on a whole new level.
2 months after being sworn in, and 2 months before starting basic training, Mr. Know-It-All, in a drug and alcohol-induced craze, committed an act of violence that caused immeasurable suffering for many people and led to me being incarcerated for the next 30 years. I tell you, I remember being emotionally numb at that point, but at the same time, feeling regret for what I had done and believing that I deserved any bad that came.
Every club I went to, they were doing coke. It was the late 70s, and I got a job as a bartender, and one customer named Junior, well, Junior was the star. Everyone gave Junior their attention, and I wanted to know why, so I began to have a relationship with Junior, and Junior introduced me to coke. We'd go out, and we'd have the best tables in the house. We'd stay at fancy hotels. I finally thought that I was somebody, that I was important. And then after a while, I didn't need Junior anymore. I became Junior. My life consisted of partying and selling drugs. I was using more than ever, but you see, that didn't matter because the drugs made me feel like I was important and I was somebody and everybody wanted me. And I was the star. But in reality, at night, I would go home and cry myself to sleep, begging God to help me. And then in the morning, I would start all over again. And all of those feelings of loneliness and no self-esteem, no self-worth, and the need for help, they were all gone.
Well, less than 2 years later, I was in jail, Rikers Island. 20 years old and arrested for a drug sale. And that's when I first witnessed prison violence. I was there for 45 days and then dumped back on the streets. Then over the next 30 years, I was in and out of Rikers over 50 times, almost always drug related. One time I was on the rock for 44 months. And most of the time it was 60 days or 90 days. And I'd be released to the streets in the morning and be high by nightfall. See, there was no treatment or motivation for me. I was virtually homeless for the next 10 years. I was the guy you would see when you got on the subway on your way to work. I slept at the end of the car, or I was hanging out on 59th Street and Columbus Avenue. Sometimes I'd be arrested for sleeping on the train or for jumping the turnstiles. It's the life you lead when drugs are everything.
I spent my entire childhood in places like 11 Hayden. From time to time, they sent me back to live with my mother, but before long, I'll be back in 11 Hayden or someplace worse. 11 Hayden had 3 counselors, 2 women and 1 man. All 3 were abusive psychos. If we ate too slow, we were punished with a beating. To this day, I find it impossible to eat slowly. They would wake us up in the middle of the night and make us squat, holding a gallon of bleach in each hand. It made me sit cross-legged under a desk in a dark room for hours, just waiting for them to decide my punishment. Usually a few punches, a few slaps, or they would slam me into a few walls. Sometimes it was worse. But they had their own clinic there. Once I spent an entire winter in that clinic. When the time came for me to go back, naturally I didn't want to go back, but I didn't have a choice. They sent me back anyway. Just about anything abusive a person did to a child, I experienced at some point.
After conviction, I was sentenced to started serving my sentence first at Comstock, then Dannemore, then Sing Sing, where I spent the next 12 years of my life. Now, for those first few years at Sing Sing, I didn't get involved in any of the programs there. I just kept to myself and did what else? I read books.
I was losing my identity. I no longer knew who I was. I wanted to be right, to be a better person. I tried drug rehab, but was too scared to find out who I was, so I put on this mask and tried to fool everybody, but only winded up fooling myself. You see, I just wanted to be loved. I met a bartender named Jimmy Donovan in 1993. We got married just to get married. I was more in love with the thought of getting married than being in love with the man that I married.
Well, in between all of the in and outs of city jails, I did 2 state bids. One for 4 years, another for 6 years, both for drug possession. Looking back, I have to say that, sadly, my mother was my enabler. She did what she knew. No one teaches you how to deal with a drug-addicted son. When I got in trouble, she was my proverbial soup kitchen and shelter. I'd clean up there and then go back to the streets. And when my dad came home, out of prison, we'd hook up and get high together. He passed away in 1987. Our relationship was, well, I feared him more than I respected him. My mom died in 2006. I'm not blaming them because that's what they knew. And that was the world we lived in.
Leo and I soon began to run away from these places. We had no idea where my mother was, so we would sleep in the woods. Or when we made it to the city, the tunnels of Grand Central Station, Central Park, Port Authority, places like that. We had them raised stealing food, so we just continued to survive doing what we know how to do. They always knew we robbed the house because only the food would be missing.
I was at least 10 years into my sentence when I wrote a short story and I showed it to another prisoner. He read it. He told me about a new group in the prison, a theater group called Rehabilitation Through the Arts. I attended a meeting, and looking back, I think that was the time and the place that I began a redirection in my life.
Guess what Jimmy Donovan wasn't? He wasn't the answer to my needs, my life. In 1995, I had my first arrest. I had been working for the president of a rehab center, but you know, with dirty urine, a failed drug test, led me to being fired. I responded by going out on a coke binge. On a drug-related charge, I got my first prison sentence of 3 to 6 years in a New York State prison. I was 39 years old.
My first son, Jeff, he was born in 1969. His mother, Julie, was the 13-year-old I spoke about earlier. She died of AIDS in 2000. I really saw that. The drug addict, absent father. My son Jeff went to prison in 1988 for drug sales. In 1983, I became the father of another boy, Joey. His mother moved out of the city to Maryland, and I have never been a part of his life.
By the time I was 15 years old, it was all about getting high, alcohol, acid, and weed. At this point, my mother was in a hospital somewhere, and I had been living in an abandoned building, and I was tired. I was tired of being hungry, tired of being dirty, tired of being cold, tired of being tired. I decided to commit suicide. I have been raised to believe suicide is a sin that sends you to hell. But at that point in my life, I figured, how much worse can hell be? So I took a bunch of pills, and the next thing I know, I wake up strapped to a bed with tubes hanging out of me. I have been in a coma, but I pulled through. A shrink sent me to Westchester County Psychiatric Center for a 90-day evaluation. 9 months later, I was still there. So I stopped taking the Thursday they had been making me take, and together with another kid climbed out a third-floor window using sheets. The kid I was with got caught as soon as we hit the ground, but I ran off into the woods, and I didn't look back. I made it to my girl's house in Brooklyn. 2 days later, I was picked up by the cops and brought back to the hospital where I was reevaluated. This time, the doctor said I was no longer a danger to myself, or maybe just not worth the trouble. So I got my brother, and we hit the streets.
After attending a few of those RGA groups, I began reading plays. Now, I had never seen a play before in my life, but something clicked. I began to recognize and understand the characters in the plays and the situations they were in. Many of those situations reminded me of the situations I've been in my circumstance. I enjoyed the plays by Lorraine Hansberry, August Wilson, and Arthur Miller. I started reading books about playwriting, and every week I would read the New York Times critic reviews. Sitting in my cell, I started writing a play. Think about that. I had never seen a play before in my life. Now I was writing one.
In prison that first time, I didn't do any work on myself. I took all the programs, drug-related and otherwise, but I just talked the talk because I knew how. I relapsed when I was in work release, and that was in 2001. And I made the decision then, and I have been drug-free ever since. That last drug trip, it scared me. I don't know what happened to me for a 15-hour period. Now, where that should scare everybody, it doesn't. It scared me. Let me explain. I remember being at a bar and looking at the clock, and it was 9 o'clock that night. My next conscious moment was noon the next day. And when I woke up, I had drugs, I had money, and I have no idea what happened. I don't know if I robbed somebody. I don't know if I killed somebody. I don't even know if I was raped. I went for HIV testing the next day, and that was it. I had hit my rock bottom, and I just wanted something better. It wasn't until after the second prison bid that programming started to matter to me. You see, because there is nothing in the prison atmosphere that makes you want to change. Prison, it's a very negative atmosphere. But you see, you can get past that negativity. When I wanted to change, when I started to change, prison couldn't stop me.
In 2002, when I was released from Oneida, it's a medium security prison. Parole sent me to a drop-in center where you would sleep sitting up in a chair. It was called the Open Door, and they had no beds. You would check out in the morning, take all your possessions with you, and had to check back in by 9 p.m. If you wanted to sleep that night in a chair by a table.
By the time I was 17 years old, I was involved in hard drugs, mostly cocaine, crack, and heroin. But I was still drinking, smoking weed, and taking acid. I was running the streets of Hell's Kitchen. I was already well educated in the art of thievery and even robberies to some extent. But my addiction became all-consuming, and I began to carry a gun. One night, my brother found me, told me I had to come to my sister's house because my mother was sick. When I got there, I found out that she was already dead. The next day, I saw her in a casket, and I told her I was sorry. Sorry I wasn't a better son. Sorry she had such a hard life. Sorry I didn't make it any easier on her. The day after my mother's funeral, I went on a run that led to my first adult arrest and my first trip to Rikers Island. This was not to be my last.
RTA was presenting plays for the prison population. We created a play called Reality in Motion, written, directed, and acted in by prisoners. I was cast as a member of the gang. Then a man named Richard Stratton, he came to Sing Sing to work with our group. Richard, he had done time, he had been on Fortune's board. He had written a book and a screenplay for a movie called Slam and gave us permission to adapt it for the stage. My third play as an actor. RTA was a laboratory for me. At that time, a lot of the old timers started giving me guidance in positive direction. And, I was open for it. See, that's the part about prison that's hardly ever talked about. The positive guidance from old timers, many of whom will never see the streets again. Then one day, a New York City radio host named Fields and Dawson, he came to Sing Sing to work with our group. His radio station, WBAI in New York City. I remember because a lot of the same old timers, they were like, yo, you gotta listen to that station. I did, and it literally became a lifeline for me.
I came home in January of 2003. No drugs, but have you ever heard the expressions of a dry drunk? Someone who isn't drinking, but still has the behaviors of a drunk? Meet Vilma. I wasn't getting high. I wanted to do right, but I wanted everything right away, and nothing was happening fast enough for me. I took a job that I hated. I fell into an ill-fated relationship. Coming home from prison that first time, it didn't prepare me for reality. I was arrested September of that same year on another drug charge and received a 3-year sentence. I was back in state prison.
A parole officer ordered me to go to the Fortune Society, which was then on 19th Street. I got myself on paper, fulfilling parole's demand. I walked in, filled out the questionnaire, and then walked out. Continued to live on the street and getting high. 2 years later, in 2004, at the age of 50, I went back to Fortune. I had had police contact, so I needed the paper to cover me. And they told me about the castle, and I became a resident. The irony is that in the 1990s, the building was a crack house where I lived on and off for 2 years. I did everything that was expected of me. I went to all the meetings. I charmed everyone. I was the model resident. Except for one thing. My big secret was that I didn't do the hard work. Barry Campbell would tell us, if we didn't deal with our demons, life would come back and bite us on the ass. I still got the teeth prints, by the way. He said that if I didn't dig deep inside and find out why I sabotaged myself, I would find out later. So I was a kid selected for special classes in junior high school who ended up with Rikers Island as a mailing address when I wasn't sleeping on the subway trains. I was Mr. Charming when I left the castle 18 months later. But the demons were still there. And so were the drugs. See, when you self-medicate, you can ignore the demons, the pain, the hurt, feelings of abandonment.
When I finished the processing at Rikers Island, I was put in a dorm with other adolescents, about 100. I looked around and saw the dorm was made up of 8 sections, all double bunk with a wide space referred to as Broadway running up the middle. There was a day room with a TV and a shower bathroom combination, all enclosed in glass so that COs can see what's going on at all times. Privacy and modesty are things you leave at the gate when you come to jail. I laid down on my bunk and I thought to myself, how am I going to be here for a whole year without going crazy? Little did I know, this was only the beginning.
I started listening to David Rothenberg on WBAI on Saturday morning. David talked about theater, prison, reentry, and it sounded like a good place for me. Up until then, I hadn't given much thought to getting out, but my mindset had changed. David, he talked about the Fortune Academy, the castle. And again, like I said, it sounded like a good place for me. In the meantime, I was working on my own play called The Nigger Trial, or The End Trial. This is a play that took place over 2 centuries during the time of slavery and the present. An NYU student named Lisa Brenniger, who worked with our group, she introduced the play to NYU.
During my second prison term, I knew I had to do things differently. Perhaps I was starting to grow up. I began to write several places about housing because I knew I could not return back to Long Island. And one of the places I wrote was a Fortune Society. I received a letter telling me about the programs, outpatient GD, employment services, but a bed at the castle could not be guaranteed while I was still locked up. So I started programming, involving myself with groups and sessions that would help me find out who Vilma was and what Vilma needed to have the life that she deserved. This wasn't as easy as it sounds.
I was tired. I wanted to try again. The castle has a second chance policy. I remember Joanne Page saying at a Thursday night meeting that if you've been drugging for 25, 30 years, you might not get it right in a 28-day treatment program. Relapse is a part of recovery. Most programs boot you out after a relapse. But not the castle. And I'll become the ultimate challenge for Fortune's second chance and third chance theories.
The next 20 years of my life was drugs, jails, alcohol, prison. When I got my first state prison bid, I thought I had made the big time. My sister Elizabeth told me, you need to stop whatever the hell it is you're doing. Do you want to end up 50 years old sitting in a room by yourself? I told her I'm already sitting in a room by myself, and I'm only 19. Prison for me was like going from junior high to senior high, because I was raised in institutions. And my first bid upstate for me was like a circus. I got into weights, into fights, and into the box. I do a few years, get released, join up with my brother and hit the streets, doing what we know how to do. Steal, rob people, sell drugs, get high, and of course, get rearrested. Change comes slowly. In 1995, I met a woman. She was the only person I could ever talk to when I wasn't high.
Not only did NYU accept my play, they agreed to give it a full production. Now imagine how I felt sitting in my cell realizing that I was a playwright. Now I'm gonna tell you, the praise that I received for my writing has filled me with the honestly earned positive self-esteem. I wrote to David at WBI, the Fortune Society, and asked if he would attend. He did, and the next week, I sat in my cell listening with humility and gratitude as David praised my play over WBAI's airwaves.
While on work release, I found the website for the Fortune Academy, and I called Pat Brown. She was the director at the time, and I told her of my situation, so she gave me an appointment for an intake. Now, I learned that it just wasn't a bed, but they were looking for people who were committed to changing their lives. And boy, was I ready. I was released on July 6th of 2007, and I came right to the castle. And when I opened the doors, I was overwhelmed by the residents and the staff. You see, I was being welcomed home. They said, "Welcome home, Velma." I knew that I was in a good place, the right place for me, and that my life is going to change forever.
2009, I was back again. I ran groups. I spoke well. I kept everybody amused. I listened to everyone's problems and their hang-ups. I gave good advice, but I forgot one thing: me. So I went back out again. 3/4 house. No quarter house. Back to the streets and the drugs.
I fell in love. I knew that I loved her because whenever I told her so, I always felt like the word love for her just wasn't enough. Allie and I moved in together. She became pregnant, and in her 8th month, I was rearrested. Because of my record, they gave me 2 to 7.5. So I did another 5.5 years. During this time, my daughter Cassie was born. And when I returned home, I was the husband and the father with no preparation for either role. But I got a job, and I was good at my job. But can you imagine a guy like me come from where I come from? Husband, father, responsibilities, scared the hell out of me. Scared the hell out of me. I went back to the streets. One day I was high and sleeping in a park on Madison Avenue and 23rd Street. A guy I know tells me about the Fortune Society. He tells me I can get a Metro card there if I had done any time. I figured I'd get this card, sell it, and be that much closer to getting high. But they had other plans for me. I saw a case manager there, and he offered me something to eat. He started to tell me about the castle and all the good things they had to offer me. But I was just thinking, yeah. Just give me the Metro card.
They began moving me around from facility to facility. I became eligible for parole after 20 years in 2006 while at Otisville. That's a medium security institution. When I was there, they announced that the Fortune Society would be coming to perform a play, The Castle. I signed up, and that is when I met Vilma and Cass, and who were part of the cast, and I met David that day. Sitting in the audience, I learned about the Fortune Society and the people who lived there. But sitting in the audience, a prisoner, thinking about parole, it never occurred to me that one day I would be a part of the cast. I'm gonna tell you that play had a profound impact upon me. I wanted to go home. I wanted to try life.
I was shown my room at the castle, and I met my roommate, and we became each other's support system. She was just as motivated as I was. On that first night, boy, I just cried. I cried because of the joy I was feeling. I finally made it. I'm gonna get my life together. Now, I'm living in this place with 56 men and 3 women. It wasn't scary at all. You know why? Because they have become my brothers and my sisters. And we have one thing in common. We've all been formerly incarcerated, and we're all just looking for something better in our lives.
I did part-time work with David at WBAI, answering phones during their fundraising drives, and people would pledge and get theater tickets. If there were any tickets left, I'd grab them. Mr. Broadway. But David started saying no to me. He'd say, come back to the Thursday night community meetings. You need that more than you need a Broadway musical. They don't give up on you. And I was pretty worn out. I knocked on the castle door for a 3rd time. And in 2012, once again, they opened the door.
I went back to the park, hit the streets, got picked up, and was sent back to Rikers on a 45-day skid bid. That arrest was July 27, 2005. Something happened on that last trip to Rikers. I really can't explain it. All I could say is that I finally had enough. I didn't want to get high anymore. I called my wife and she was there the next day. We sat down, we talked, she cried. I could have gone back to her when I was released, but I had made that mistake already. I knew I couldn't go back to her without first learning how. So I went back to Fortune. As fate would have it, I saw the same case manager. Again, he offered me something to eat. Again, he told me about the castle. This time I listened. This time I didn't want a Metro card. This time I wanted my life. As a little boy, I used to read about King Arthur and Camelot. And whenever my family was evicted, I would always think to myself, if only we had a castle, then nobody could make us leave. Well, it took me almost 40 years, but I finally found my castle.
After 30 years, that included 6 parole board appearances, I finally made it forward. August 30th, 2016 was my release date. I have been accepted as a resident in the castle, and that's exactly where I needed to land because I had been locked up between the ages of 20 and 50. I needed positive guidance and reentry. I knew it, and that's exactly what I got from the Fortune Society staff as well as its residents. On my first day out, I wandered all over West Harlem. You know what happened? I got lost.
You know, it's been all about making a new life for myself, but nothing gave me more pride and joy than when my family came to Fortune's Family Day. So my mom, my brothers, sisters, and nieces, everybody was there. And we were sitting down eating, and my mama turns around to me and she says to me, "I'm so proud of you." That right there meant more to me than anything I could have ever wanted. You know, the castle people kept on telling me that I have to do the work, but they created this place which allowed me to dig deep inside myself.
At one of the Thursday night community meetings, I was waxing eloquent. When Stanley Richards challenged me, "Easy," he said. "You always amuse us and you inspire us when you speak. But who are you when there is no audience?" And I started to respond, and he cut me off. No. He said, "No, you don't have to answer to me or any of us. The only person you have to answer that to is Easy. So tonight, when you go upstairs, look in your mirror and ask that person who he is and what does he want. That's when the hard work, the real hard work began."
I stayed at the castle for over a year, during which time I began to develop my own plan. I volunteered at the Fortune Society and began school at the resource group to become a substance abuse counselor, using my past life to work with others. I was hired part-time in the education unit. This led to me being hired full-time in the alternative to incarceration unit, working with kids 15, 16, 17 years old. Kids who are going through things I went through more than 30 years ago. The times have changed, but the feelings are the same. I began to speak on television, radio, representing thousands of men and women just like me who are still behind bars.
When I finally did find my way back, after wandering around, some of the residents, they were like, yo, you should have called and we would have come and got you.
Mhm.
But that was something I wanted to, knew I had to do on my own. Besides, I didn't have a phone, and after all that time, I wouldn't have known how to use one anyway. The thing I remember most about wandering around, looking around that day was seeing children playing for the first time, freely. That's a sight I hadn't seen in 30 years.
I have since reestablished ties with my brothers and sisters, and sometimes on holidays we all get together at my sister's house on Long Island. At night, when our kids are asleep, we sit on the back porch and talk about our wild, crazy childhoods, trying to make sense of it all. I was 6 years old when they first took me away from my mother. As she was leaving, she gave me a St. Christopher medal. She told me it would protect me. As she was walking away, I took it off and I threw it on the ground. I was angry. In my eyes, they weren't taking us away. She was throwing us away. 34 years later, I'm sitting on my sister's porch when she turns to me and says, I have something for you. When she handed it to me, I was amazed at how shiny it still was. I put it on and I never took it off again. It says St. Christopher protect me.
After nearly 2 years at the castle, I moved into my own apartment. That's also owned by the Fortune Society. It's called Castle Garden. For the last 8 years, I've worked as a case manager for a health insurance company. And I've remained a dedicated member of the theater group I spoke to you about, RTA.
I continue to come to the castle for Thursday night meetings because I needed to stay connected to the place where I became face to face with myself. I go to NA meetings and I even sing at Fortune's Monthly Cafe in Long Island City. In 2015, I learned that I had prostate cancer and began radiation treatments. But as the song says, I'm still here. Drug-free for 11 years. And something I haven't done since I was 14.
Through the castle, I've been going to Broadway, off-Broadway shows, but my high is from the life I lead today. A while back ago, Christine Everslaw came to the castle for a performance, and when she got there, she came upstairs to my room. So now we're in my room, and we're talking and taking pictures like we're best friends. When we got downstairs and she started to perform, all I thought about was, wow, a year ago, I was in a New York State prison, and today I'm conversing and taking pictures on my cell phone with a 2-time Tony Award-winning actress. Isn't that something? You know, I found the love and the acceptance I've always been looking for, without the drugs, without the alcohol. It seemed easy, but this road was hard to find. I like Vilma today. Or should I say, I love Vilma today.
All right.
And you know what? That is a wonderful feeling.
So in the following year, I was diagnosed with colon cancer, face to face with death. And after spending 40 years trying to kill myself on drugs, I wanted to live. I didn't want to die addicted. I was hospitalized while I was living at the castle, and the treatments were successful. And then I was ready for the world. I moved out of the academy in July of 2014. My own apartment in the Bronx. Drug-free. I even stopped smoking.
After that last trip to Rikers, I knew that the crazy, self-destructive life was over for me. I remember looking around the bullpen, and for the first time, I could smell the piss and vomit. For the first time, I realized that I was allowing myself to be treated like an animal. For the first time, I felt like I didn't belong there. Every other time I was arrested, I always felt like that's where I belong and that's what I deserve. But not on that last trip. It was my time. That's what happened. It was my time. There were thousands and thousands of guys just like me running around New York City, growing up in youth houses and ended up in crack houses. I knew, and I still know, a ton of them. We run into each other, tell each other war stories. Sooner or later, you get tired. It's your time. The lucky ones have someone or something to hold on to when that happens. I have a woman who loves me, and I was blessed with the castle where they showed me the way. As a kid, and even as an adult sleeping on trains, I always had a book in my back pocket. I owe a lot to Jack London, Charles Dickens, Mark Twain, Superman and Batman. I always knew there was something better. I just didn't know how to find it. My brother's still struggling with addiction. And I know I can't do it for him. I can be there for him. And I can help to show him the way. I can only hope that it's his time.
I began by telling you that I served 30 years for a violent crime that I committed almost 38 years ago. My feelings of remorse, guilt, shame will never undo my offenses. I never believed that I'd ever be able to forgive myself. But there came a point when I made a conscious decision to do just that. I found a way to live with those feelings I described. Now, when I was in prison, I participated in numerous therapeutic, educational programs, but then there was all the artistic activities that I talked to you about. But it was the potency of those emotions that I just described to you. You know, the first time being on it, not being able to mask it, you know, feeling that pain, coupled with the constructive insights that I gained from all those other things that led me along the path of positive development, which includes now, as it did then, a constant examination and re-examination of the motives behind and the consequences of my actions. I regret what it cost for me develop into a morally responsible person today. But because it has, I'm all the more committed to never again being the person that I once was. And with that, to understand and to cherish freedom.
Well, there's a saying that life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop once in a while and look around, you might miss it. I'm seeing a lot of things for the first time these days.
My name is Casimiro Torres, and I lived at the castle. I was homeless when I arrived in 2005, with 67 arrests and 16 years in prison. Today, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm an advocate, I am a taxpayer.
My name again is Philip Hall. Philip Hall. I came to the castle in August of 2016 after 30 years in the New York State prison system. Today, I live in an apartment, not a cell anymore. I've been gainfully employed for 8 years, and I can modestly add that I'm a playwright. And I too am a taxpayer.
My name is Vilma Ortiz Donovan. I'm a 61-year-old Hispanic woman who came to the castle in July of 2007 after concluding my second state prison bid. Well, today, 17 years I came in as a participant, and today I'm the executive assistant to the deputy CEO of the Fortune Society. I live in a beautiful brownstone apartment in Harlem. I travel, and I am living my best life. And I also am a taxpayer.
My name is Irvin Hunt. I've been called Easy since I was a kid. I'm a former castle resident. I'm recovering everything with more than 50 arrests. At 69, I'll be 70 tomorrow.
Amen.
Amen.
I just started my life. So now, getting off this high school, thank you so much. So now I have my own apartment. I have an incredible cat named Chatter. I call it that because so it does. I have a bank account. I have good credit.
All right. Amen.
I travel. I perform in theater in the park, Central Park. I'm truly blessed. But more than that, I'm a taxpayer too.
Thank you.
We have a round of applause for hey, standing and before I call upon my spiritual elder, the great David Paul Rothenberg, I want to call up Mark. Come on, Mark. Marco is a young man. So, exactly. So the great thing about Fortune is we have a great collaboration, and that's in no small measure to David, who's here, because people come from New York to New Jersey, and people go from New Jersey to New York, and it's important. We've got a great partnership. I'd like to think David as being our spiritual father for the Reentry movement.
I like that.
Yeah, maybe even a patriarch. But he's been so much as a leader. But Mark, can you just talk about, and here's this young guy who came from New York, and he went through NJRC, Reentry. And so I'm sitting there, and he came here because of these great 4 stars. But he told me he's on the way to studios in Brooklyn because he's got a small part in a theater production. But I just want him to talk a little bit about not only New York and New Jersey and his own story.
And he lived
Thank
at
you,
the
thank
And
you,
he lived
Gov.
at the castle.
Yes,
He lived
I
at
did.
the
I'm a
castle.
former council
Okay,
resident.
yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Governor. David, thank you. Easy.
Hey.
Loma, Mr. Paul, Casimiro. Look at this guy.
Yeah.
Cass, my bad,
Yeah.
Cass. So, I mean, I stand too far, in front of people, but I started my journey in the castle in the year of 2019. And with the help of David Rothenberg and the Fortune Society, I was able to secure a internship with Mike Bloomberg, former mayor of New York City.
He ran in the marathon.
Yes, and I run the New York City Marathon for a year now.
I got pictures. I got
Be out there this year. Go Marco.
pictures. Yeah.
Find you around the corner.
So not to get off the topic, being at the castle showed me how to have transferable skills. I was in the streets for a long time, and they showed me how to, use that and shoot it in a positive direction.
Amen.
I then moved out of the castle, moved back to New Jersey. I was in my kid's life. My daughter is 12, the other one's 16. I look young, but I'm about to be 40. Thank you for the marathons. They keep me young. And once I came over here to New Jersey, I needed help with housing and getting into college. Right now, I do environmental testing. So I'm an EPA lead inspector for the New York City Housing Authority.
Nice.
I secured that by the help of Governor McGreevy and Reentry. Can't forget his chief of staff, Reverend Flores. They got me into Hudson County Community College for environmental science. So I'm still in the middle of completing that. And with their help, I was able to, become who I am today and aspire to aspire. And now, knowing David.
I have one question for you. You still come back to the Thursday meetings at the castle. Why?
The Thursday night meetings is like church for me. And I'm not really religious. I mean, I'm Christian, but I'm not gonna say I'm a religious person. I'm spiritual. And being in that space between the academy and the castle, just being in that space and hearing people, talk about things that nobody else knows about but them. So being in there, you hear the voices that are never heard. And those that are the closest to the problem are far from the solution. While I'm in there, I can at least see if I can help them navigate.
Does it help you?
It does. It helps me sleep better at night, and I'm happy that I can always, lend a helping hand. The same way you helped me, the same way Rothenberg helped me, the same way Governor McGreevy helped me, everyone here, every entry. I'm just too blessed to stress. Thank you so much.
Amen. So what I'm really proud of Marco, as we all are, particularly David, and Marco just has a little asterisk. He just has to stay out of certain bars in Bayonne, but I'm not
Okay,
gonna-
Yes.
But in a special way, so this is an opportunity because I think David's perspective was always about telling people's stories, telling people's narratives. And that's when we listen to other people's narratives, we hear our own stories or part of them, and part of their victories and part of their successes and part of their journey. And so now to do a great Q&A, we call upon our leader, David Paul Rothenberg.
I call upon all of you for your questions and your comments. Because I think it's theater, but it's also a healing experience. I hope it resonates. Does anybody have a question for these candid, remarkable, beautiful human beings?
And if not, it's okay. Okay?
Sure. So
Was that a hand or a scratch?
Yeah, Jim raised his hand.
So what was the hardest part in your journey? What was the hardest part in your journey to share with us today?
Who are you asking?
Again, the hardest part for me, telling the truth. I lied most of my life. I lied about everything in my life. Until Dad asked me one day, he said, listen, man, you don't have to lie about anything. Your truth is your truth.
Amen.
And that's what I did. I looked in the mirror and said, okay.
I'm not really as smart.
Yes, he is.
He's too Jewish.
So once I realized that the truth is so simple, once you tell it, I remember you telling me, so listen, the truth is easy. When you lie, you gotta remember your lie, and then you gotta remember that lie, and then you gotta remember that lie. So, I came face to face with myself, and I just started telling the truth about myself.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask all of you, you was at your darkest moment, right? And you thought there was no help around. Right? What propelled you to look deeper in yourself and say, I had enough?
That's a tough one. Did you all hear that? People in their darkest moment, what compelled them to ask for help? As you attempted suicide, That was your darkest moment, only you,
Yeah.
you
Mine
blacked out,
was-
that was your dark.
Mine was, the thing was when, I go out and I get high and I drink and do whatever, and I do stupid shit, like really dumb shit, like dance on the bar, make out with people, whatever. And I would always call the next day, somebody, the bartender, say, what did I do? They're like, oh, and I'd say, oh, no, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to hear it. This time around, what scared me was that nobody could tell me who I left with, where I still to this day, I have no idea. And that when I panicked because I started calling people, who did I leave with? What was I doing? Nobody could answer me. That's when I said, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. Because it really, like I said, I don't know. I had thousands of dollars and grams of coke in my pocket. And I was just like, that
I
was
think
it.
he wants to know where you got the strength to know that. Is that what you're asking?
Well, that's what it was.
Yeah.
Straight to say that
You
to
gotta
myself
dig,
that
you
I
gotta dig into yourself.
I can't do it anymore. And then the process of recovery was letting go of all of that shame and that guilt and finding somebody who I can relate to. When I was locked up the second time, I was in Beacon, it was 250 women. There was this one counselor who said, who really wants to change here? Out of the 250 women who showed up in that group, 3 of us. And that's when I started to change. I found somebody that I could relate. When I got to the castle, I had Leslie. You see, because I get high because I don't want to think about, I did a lot of shit, man, and I don't want to think about it, so I got high. But finding that person that I could actually let go, I told her everything from everything. And it was just like, I threw up on her, and that's when my journey began. Okay, where do we go
His
from
question
here?
is, why were you one of the 3 instead of one of, I think that's even tough. Why did, we may not have the answer for that.
I just wanted to know what the officer say, I'm looking at, right. I come out of that gutter to be the person that you are, because like I said, I can relate to every single one of y'all, because I've been down myself, all right? I got 46 years in, I did 46 years, so I come out a whole different person, right?
Here,
The same thing,
you're here.
right?
Made
So,
a
like I
choice.
said, I just want to say what y'all doing for me inspired me to keep moving forward and never look back.
That's right.
And I just want to thank you for it.
Yeah, Kaz and Phil, that's a tough question, but everybody should get a shot at it.
Just like I said, I'm 3rd generation. I was in jail, my mom was in jail, and my son was in jail. One day I just happened to ask myself, how much jail do you need? You didn't need it.
Yes, sir.
You didn't need the jail. Because you had the answers before you went. And I got there, and then I was posed that question. What do you want to do that's different? I don't want to do on the no more, on the counter, on the visit, on the chat, on the VI. I don't want to do nothing, no more.
No more on the,
No more on the.
Kaz.
That's what I was gonna say, actually.
Um,
Well, I don't remember the exact question, I'm sorry. What made us change at our darkest point? I was thinking about it after you said it when everybody was talking. Everybody thinks my darkest points when I try to kill myself. It wasn't, It was just what I talk about. I don't talk about my darkest points, But I will tell you that a couple things, like, my mother died 40 years ago today. Today is the anniversary of death, and I think about these things. And I can say my darkest points vary, from day to day. This is the challenge. These are the things we deal with on a daily basis. Your darkest point is fluid, it's what my darkest point is, like getting up in the morning. Everything is a challenge. It's like life is gonna show up, and it ain't always gonna be with a box of chocolate, You just gotta be ready to be fluid with it. And I think my darkest point in some ways, because like I said, it changes, is, looking in the mirror at some point and saying, you're full of shit, you are full of shit. What you just said is bullshit. What you've been saying for your whole life is bullshit. Sometimes what you've been telling other people is bullshit. Being honest is, being honest with yourself, because nothing else matters. It's part of that darkest point. having the balls to make change in your life is part of the darkest point. And the thing is that changes the whole thing. It's, again, this is fluid also. I tell the story about when I first changed my life, that what I did was I did a physical practice. I would use my left hand instead of my right hand. I wanted myself to be uncomfortable. I went around the castle and I used to pick up pieces of paper on the floor and throw it in the garbage can. I did anything that I didn't normally do to make myself more comfortable with change, because I was desperate to make that change. So I did anything I could that was different from what I would normally do, including listening to shit that I just didn't have the patience to listen to before. And the truth was, I didn't have the patience. I didn't want to hear it. You know what I'm saying? And I think the biggest challenge for me was, the suicide attempt didn't work. It was a serious attempt. I didn't scratch my ribs. I really wanted to die, and I almost made it. But after that, I kept going. I just turned to violence in a different way to other people. I mean, when I was a kid and when I was victimized, I was a little boy. I wasn't tall. And at a certain point, I was 16. I was 6'2", and I came about 220 pounds. I decided that my turn, and I turned it on other people. At a certain point in my life, I realized that I didn't want. Initially, I didn't want to be a victim, and I was determined not to be a victim. And whatever violence it took, it took. At a certain point in my life, I realized I didn't want anybody else to be a victim either. And I think the hardest point was for me to be honest. That was the darkest.
Can I ask to replace the dark moments with things that give you pride and joy? I watch you with Allie and with your kids, and that's the opposite of.
I was asked to speak at an event at Samaritan Village yesterday for Father's Day, and I didn't tell my daughter, because my son has a practice. He's an LCSW and he has patients, so he couldn't come. I didn't tell my daughter because she's in Connecticut, where she went to college. She lives there now. I didn't want her to travel, but my wife told her, and she insisted on coming, and she was with me yesterday. And my kids are, what I live
The
for.
opposite of the darkest.
Yeah,
And
and honestly, I have a dog and 2 cats that I rescued, and these are things that get me through the day. This is what I live for and what I love.
Can I say with me, I mean, you did 46 years, so I know you understand what I'm talking about. I mean, just pain. I mean, and for me, it wasn't the pain so much for being in there, even though that hurt. I regretted what I did. That was painful to come face to face with that, not to have any drugs to mask it. And, it's just the pain, and, I'm tired of being in pain and always going back to that place and put myself back in the fire. You know what I mean? It just started to hurt too much. And, I don't use drugs today. I don't drink. Drinking was never my problem. But I know me. I know that if I drink will become the new drug, whatever that drug was back then. So I don't do it. Because I don't want to go back to a place where I cause suffering for other people. Because I really felt that pain. And I just looked at my life and what a mess I made of it. I made of other people's lives. And, I felt ashamed of that. I regretted it. I don't want to live that way again. I don't want to be known by people in that way again. And that was it for me.
And you should be proud for asking one of the toughest questions.
Yeah.
Which is good stuff.
And so,
Way in the back.
Yeah.
You're so far back we can't see you, so she'll go first.
first of all, I want to thank you. So you just brought me to tears because, I've been working in Reentry since 2008. I had the pleasure to work with how many years? I still talk about my best times working with you. But, and I'm currently now working in the jail. But I could identify, thank God I don't have addiction or whatever, but I could identify with everything you said. And you brought me to tears, you as a child. And the only thing, my question is, can I come visit Castle House one day?
You what?
Come visit Castle House
Yes,
one day. That's the question. But I want to thank you. And, every day there's a lot of bureaucracy. And sometimes I'm like, effing had it.
And they say, no, it's all about the inmates. And every day I try to go in, treat them with love, respect, let them, and because when you see this, boy, I just want to thank you, and I don't know, I'm really touched. Thank you.
Way in the back, I can almost see you. You got a question? Spot?
No, first and foremost, I'm gonna say the play was excellent. I came in just to become this. I want to do this. This is my engagement. I was incarcerated 10 years back. I just came home last 15 months. Once it came on my thing, I went to Reentry and had to set. So the most important thing was to come and enjoy it and get a feel. This is what I want to do. I want to get back. I want to talk. I want to engage. I want to hear. We're missing this. A lot of times, it's like there's a spotlight on you, and it's like you just an assumption. You went to prison, you just this and that, just put to the wayside. There's a lot more things there. There's a lot more things you can accomplish. But like he said, it was the greatest thing I've ever heard. You was who you was before you got there, for real. You was already in there. It's already embedded. You got to find it yourself. Yeah. For me as an individual, I found the Wall Street Journal. It was the oddest thing. It was a newspaper. They gave me real-time information. I kept reading it. I kept feeling like I was outside. And I just kept, and then just the parallel. I came home, I said, I'm gonna take my time. My time that I did in there, I knew it might take half the time to get myself together. So I didn't force feed it. I didn't rush anything. I took my time. Look how this came. It's like everything I wanted to do when I was there. It was the epitome of what I was doing to get myself back, to get home. Was to being sort of like this. I could see like Phil Hall. I was in the cell with a guy, 37 years straight. It was incredible. You wouldn't even think he did it.
And you're only 19 years old.
Huh? I'm turning that tomorrow. But no, honestly, but this is why I can't. I know my mom just had surgery. I'm just in the valley. Let me go. I don't tell her, calm down. I came here for this. Like, this is what I want. I don't want to undermine.
If that's what you want to do, then do it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It starts. Initiation, right? You can handle it.
This is the first day.
Well, whatever I can do, take a point of contact.
Talk to us later. We'll give you that.
This is the point of it. I can say it was great.
This gentleman we met, how many times?
15 years ago. My name is Hugh Shark. I met Dave. I was wandering the streets of Jersey City.
Amen.
Looking actually for a seminar by government Reed was putting on at St. Peter's College, and I was interested in the whole recovery of the addiction was a big issue. So Dave saw me lost, trying to find my way
We were
around.
lost together.
And he asked me my story, and talking to your story, why you're attending or interested in the topic. And so he brought up my situation without mentioning names on the dais and told what I was there for. But he invited me to the Thursday night meeting at the castle. So I went over a couple weeks later and I spoke to the group and told them my story. And I said, coming from a parent's side, how what was going on, and how my wife and I were, and then the guys in the group, the people in the group were, I like to hear your wife's side of the story, and so my wife, Mary, who's sitting in the back, she came 2 weeks later or another week later, and she told her side of the story, of recovery and how it impacts the family and spouses, and you mentioned, and you guys did a great job, and you really did a tremendous job of explaining what's going on in your own personal lives, but there's also the side of how it affects the family members too. And you all touched on that. And so there's this concept called recovery capital, where you can come from good backgrounds, or you have a lot of good things going on in your life, and you want to keep building on that for the tougher times. When that happens, when you have a bad day or something else, that you can draw on these good things. And one of the good things that you can draw on is what you're doing right now, is giving back and helping other people, sharing your stories. And that's invaluable to do that. David's been doing that his entire life, so he's has a lot of recovery capital that he's dispensing. And same with Governor McGreevy, So anyway, congratulations, guys.
Stick around. If you have questions, we'll stick around because he's trying to kick us out.
Okay.
He's running for mayor, so he's.
And he's gonna win.
1 o'clock, so we have 2 boxes of Dunkin' Donuts coffee in the back.
25 cents.
Yeah.
No, we don't charge, we're not like Fortune. 6 donuts. Thank you very much. Give everybody a applause.
Where is